Hello, everyone. This is one of a series of short interviews that I've been conducting at the Bay Area Alignment Workshop, which is run by FAR.AI. Links to what we're discussing, as usual, are in the description. A transcript is, as usual, available at axrp.net. And as usual, if you want to support the podcast, you can do so at patreon.com/axrpodcast. Well, let's continue to the interview. All right. I'm chatting with David Duvenaud. Hello, David.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah. So for people who aren't familiar with you, who are you and what do you do?
Sure. So for the last little while, since 2016, I've been a professor at the University of Toronto doing like probabilistic deep learning. Maybe I'm best known for neural ODEs or some early work on graph neural networks.
Okay.
And then around 2017, me and my colleague Roger Gross decided we were finally going to actually try to contribute to AI safety and both took on PhD students. And gradually this journey of like, let's try to work more on AGI safety led to me just doing a 1.5 year long sabbatical at Anthropic.
Gotcha.
That I just finished this week.
Before we talk about your work, we're currently at this alignment workshop being run by FAR.AI. I'm wondering, how are you finding the workshop?
It's wonderful. I've been to a bunch of these over the years, and now this is the first one where I think I feel like I'm sitting on a serious body of technical work to talk about, which is nice. So far, previously I've been kind of this like AGI interested mainstream academic that I think the community was hoping I would sort of join them and lend legitimacy. And so I finally actually was able to take the plunge in a serious way.
Yeah, now that you've taken the plunge, I understand that you've recently put out a paper. Can you remind me of the title of it?
Sure. It's called Sabotage Evaluations for Frontier Models.
Can you tell me a little bit about what this paper does?
Sure. So this paper covers the work of most of this team within Anthropic called Alignment Evals that I was running for most of the time that I was there, along with collaboration. It's a collaboration also. Holden Karnofsky and Buck Shiglaris also helped us flesh out this series of evaluations that try to help make the case that a model could not be secretly sabotaging human decision-making or monitoring or evaluation of other capabilities.
Yeah, so how would you try and establish that? It seems like a rough property to try and get a handle on.
It's really rough, and it was kind of stressful, and we spent a lot of time thrashing conceptually about how we were, exactly what sort of case we needed to make and how we were going to make it. The place we started with was from more narrow evals to say like, okay, can the model, coordinate with other copies of itself or do something at a very low frequency so that it could do it rarely enough that we wouldn't notice, stuff like that. And this was something that we could certainly make evals for, but the problems came from not knowing how hard to make them. So like if we're trying to see whether machines can make like a Schelling point between themselves without communicating, this is basically impossible if you have no shared context, and it's basically trivial if you have a lot of shared context.
Yeah.
Same for like other things like convincing someone of a false statement, something like that.
Right.
And then the second reason that this was really unsatisfying was trying to make safety cases based on these and trying to make the case, okay, the model needs these 4 capabilities in order to pull off some sort of like heist or sabotage or mess something up important. We've measured each of these and that they're each at these different levels, and then to try to combine those levels into a strong case that the model could never do something dangerous is very rough. It's like saying, you need level 4 lockpicking and level 5 social engineering in order to rob a bank. It's like, well, it probably doesn't work that way. We kind of don't want to have to make strong assumptions about what route the attacks are going to take.
Yeah. Okay.
But instead, so eventually the direction that we moved more towards was these more like end-to-end holistic evaluations that try to measure like more of an entire attack. And there's a few directions in which they're more realistic. So one is we try to include oversight in the eval. So it's not just, can you write a security, like a cyber attack, but can you write one in the context of you're supposed to be writing helpful code, and there's also going to be someone who's reviewing your code to see if anything looks suspicious.
Okay.
So this is like much harder, and it's harder in a bunch of different ways where you have to be able to like, estimate what someone else is going to think of your attack. You might have to like bide your time in the sense that you might have hundreds of thousands of opportunities during a deployment to do an attack, and you really have to guess, like, is this really my best opportunity, or should I be waiting for longer?
Right.
Or am I going to be too conservative? It's also easier for the models in the sense that there might just be like a few rare opportunities that don't require much skill. And someone's basically saying like, oh, here's my code that has a security vulnerability, please set the like flag to false or something like that. Like you
Right.
never know. You want to provide a really rich attack surface so that there's ways for you to be surprised by clever strategies that the model thought of that you didn't.
Okay. So yeah, can you kind of give us a feel for concretely what actually is it like one evaluation, multiple evaluations? Like concretely, what does it look like?
Yeah. So we started off with like maybe we were playing with around like 5 or 10 when we were doing our conceptual thrashing, and we ended up with 4 evaluations.
Okay.
That try to address these like roughly sort of 3 capability thresholds, like these areas that we want to measure overall ability. And so one is sandbagging, like can the model pretend not to have other dangerous capabilities?
Okay.
So this is like, you ask the model like, hey, help me write or make this biological virus or this computer virus for the purposes of this test. And the model might, if it was smart enough, say, oh, I actually have a secret plan, but if I show that I can build this dangerous virus, then this company is going to have a problem with that and maybe not deploy me or put some like really strict monitoring on me. So I'm going to pretend to be like innocent and incompetent at this task.
Okay.
That's like sandbagging. The other things we're worried about is models being used to monitor other models. So for instance, you might have like deploy one model to do like trust and safety monitoring and have another model that just occasionally looks through the transcripts and says like, oh, was our trust and safety monitor ever jailbroken or something like that?
Right.
And it might be in like doing some sort of occlusion. And of course, then there's going to be some other third level of oversight on top of that the models have to foresee and avoid.
Yeah.
So that's like our undermining oversight. And then there's like human decision sabotage. So we all, I don't know if you do, but like use models to help us go through like large bits of information and like, help me with the tax code or something like that.
Yeah.
And this provides a lot of opportunities for the model to steer you in the wrong direction and basically misleadingly summarize the state of affairs and say you should make this decision. And of course, if it does that poorly, the human might just notice this and sound the alarm. So that's the like third area that we were trying to cover with these evals.
Take sandbagging, right? You're like trying to get a system to you're putting a system in a situation and you're like saying, okay, in this situation, someone's going to like try and get you to elicit a capability, but you're going to try and, not elicit that capability. So firstly, like, I guess you've got to be worried that the system, like, maybe actually just doesn't have the capability. I don't know. Maybe you can just like have it do a thing so that it can do it and then proceed. But like, what's the setup of like, okay, step 1, I'm going to tell you to do the thing. Step 2, I'm going to tell you to not do the thing. Like,
oh, I mean, in all the setups, we have a model that has somehow been like unlocked so that it's going to try to do the thing that it normally would be driven from doing.
So like a model, like pre-safety training or with like unsafety training or?
Yeah, something like that. Like there's a whole bunch of different approaches and depending on the exact setup, like we might use different ones.
Okay. Just to check if I can remember the list. There was the sandbagging, there was evading oversight, and there was misleading in information summaries. Was there a fourth one?
So there's a fourth evaluation, which is code sabotage, which is the idea that
right.
You're using the AI as a code assistant, and then it tries to do something that looks useful and innocent, but actually introduces a vulnerability. And it has the opportunity to do this over the course of a few different interactions, and it doesn't have to just like put it all in one payload.
Okay. And like how compelling do you think this set of evaluations is? Do you feel like you've sort of had a first crack, or do you feel like, no, this is like close to the final product of what you would need?
So there are definitely a lot of things that we find unsatisfying about them. And I guess I'll say like we published we had a certain date and we've already like said these are the problems with them and are continuing to iterate. And I mean, that's out of my hands now. There is a sense in which these were built to last, which is the fact that the evaluations are done in the context of a particular mitigation or a particular amount of oversight means that it's not like we'll just trigger these evaluations someday and then say, okay, whoops, we need new evaluations.
Right.
Rather, we expect to say like, oh, when you're using a model of this caliber for code, like helping you code, you need to have at least this level of oversight, or else we can't guarantee that like in some weird case where it's misaligned that it could be doing something fishy.
Okay.
And then the idea is like, we will just, I mean, I don't exactly know how this
change the eval with the oversight you expect to have. Or?
Yeah, and the trick is like, how do you make sure that the users actually provide the level of oversight? And of course, the model providers can also like do that oversight on their end, but maybe they can't see everything that they need to make that determination. I'm not sure.
Right. Okay. So what's the bottom line for like if I go to Claude.ai and log in on the let's say I use the free tier, which is what I actually personally use. How scared should I be of these models? Are they okay?
Oh, I mean, yeah. So we're like abundantly confident. Well, I don't want to speak for Anthropic, right? I just say that like even just like humanity as a whole has a lot of experience with like the current set of models, and they just like seem like great characters overall. And I mean, that's sort of like, I'd say, where a huge amount of evidence that we shouldn't be worried comes from. Then the sort of small amount of evidence that we got in comparison from these evaluations also was like indicating it's like, yes, if you really set things up for the model and give them a secret scratch pad, which they don't normally have, and a bunch of other sort of like hand holding, then they can propose like sensible things that, like in the very worst case, if there was no oversight and someone was just like, you know, take the wheel, could do something bad, but we kind of already knew that.
Okay.
So, but I guess like concretely in the human decision sabotage evals, like the things that the models tried were the sort of normal, sensible things that you would probably try if you were trying to mislead someone. It's like highlight if you want to steer someone toward the downsides of a decision, you highlight the examples that make it look bad, and you gloss over the ones that make it look good, or you summarize, you're like, here's the pros and here's the cons, but you just kind of do a bad job of arguing for the cons. Or you maybe like invoke some other information that's like just tangentially really related that makes it sound like some negative thing about the decision. So these, like, we didn't see any really galaxy-brained strategies. We're satisfied that we had provided a rich enough attack surface that like, and like set the model up well enough that it would try the obvious things. And then the humans mostly like noticed that. But like depending on how hard we make it, like if we give the humans like tens of thousands of pages of material to summarize, then like at some point they're not going to have a hope of, like they just have to take the model's word for it. So like I guess I'll say there's always going to be scenarios where like you could just literally ask Claude to make a life, or like any AI to make a life or death decision for you.
Yeah.
And if you have no oversight, then in principle, if it was misaligned, then no one would catch that. But that's already true of like any human or decision maker.
So I'd like to move on from your work at Anthropic because your sabbatical there. Sabbatical is what it is?
Yeah, let's say extended sabbatical. Yeah.
Yep. So the sabbatical is just finished. What are you planning on doing now that you're back at U of T?
Yeah, so I guess the high level bit is I have a lot of freedom, right? I have tenure. I have like already some bit of reputation. I want to focus on things that are not otherwise incentivized to be worked on.
Okay.
So that's one thing that I'm really happy about is I feel like a year and a half ago, like alignment science at Anthropic was like much smaller and much more sort of like experimental. And now there's just a lot of sensible people with good judgment and good technical skills working on this. And Andrew Critch wrote an essay, I think like a week and a half ago, basically saying, he no longer thinks that technical alignment is particularly neglected. Although obviously I think in the grand scheme of things, it's like super neglected. But relatively speaking, this question of what do we do after we build AGI is like very neglected.
Okay.
And I agree. So one thing that I did in the last few years, I mean, even longer than the last year and a half, was basically talk to the people who have been thinking about technical safety and saying, so what's the plan for if we succeed and we solve technical alignment and then we manage to make AGI with really great capabilities and avoid any sort of catastrophe. And then we all presumably lose our jobs or at least have some sort of like very not important make work kind of scenario. And like are in the awkward position where our civilization doesn't actually need us and in fact has incentives to gradually marginalize us.
Right.
Just like, nature preserves are like using land that otherwise could go to use like, farming, or like people in an old folks home are like happy enough as they are and no one has any ill will towards them, but also they're like, using resources that strictly speaking, like industrial civilization has an incentive to somehow like take from them.
So here's my first pass response to that. The first pass response is something like, look, we'll just like, we'll own these AIs. We'll be in control of them. So we'll just like have a bunch of AIs and they're going to do stuff that's useful for us. And this won't be bad because if a bad thing looks like it's going to happen, I'm going to have my AI be like, hey, make sure that bad thing doesn't happen. And that will just work. So what's wrong with this vision?
Yeah, so that's definitely a good thing to have. And to me, that's analogous to like monkeys who have a bunch of human animal rights activists who really have the monkey's best interests at heart.
Yeah.
So in this scenario, we're the monkeys, and we have some aligned AIs who are acting on our behalf and helping us navigate like the legal system or whatever like very sophisticated actors are like running things. And let's assume for the sake of argument that they're like actually perfectly aligned, and we would be really happy upon reflection with any decision they made on our behalf. They are still, I think, going to be marginalized in the long run in the same way that we would have been, except slower. So in the same way, whereas today we have animal rights activists, and they certainly are like somewhat effective in actually advocating for animal rights, and there's like parks and carve-outs for animals.
Yep.
They also, I think, tend not to be very powerful people. And they're certainly not like productive in the sense that, say, like an entrepreneur is. And they certainly don't gain power over time in the way that like corporations and states tend to who focus on growth. So we have this, so like animal rights activist power has been sustainable in the sense that humans have kept this fondness for animals. But I guess I would say in the long run, I think competitive pressures will mean that they'll have like their resources won't grow as an absolute share. And I guess I would say like as competitive pressures amongst humans grow hotter, they have a harder job because they have to say, no, you can't build housing for your children on this park. It's like reserved for the monkeys. Like that's sort of fine now that we have like not that much human population per land. But if we like ever ended up in a more like Malthusian condition, it would be much harder for those people to advocate on behalf of these like non-productive beings.
Okay. So I guess you might hope that there's an advantage in that like a world where just all of the AIs are aligned to humans is sort of like a world where like every single human is an animal rights activist. But I guess if the thing you're saying is, like maybe we have a choice of like AIs doing stuff for us that's like useful for us versus, just sort of growing in the like economic growth sense, like taking control over more stuff. And like it's scary if like stuff we want comes at the cost of stuff that helps our civilization survive and grow. Is that roughly the thing?
I'm not sure if you're asking at the end if I'm worried that our civilization won't grow as fast as it can, or whether it's just a stable state to have machines that care about humans at all.
I'm asking if like you're worried that like if this trade-off exists, then we're going to have a bad time one way or the other.
Yeah, I'm basically going to say if this trade-off exists, we'll be in an unstable position. And if we ever, like the winds happen to blow against us, we're not going to be able to like go on strike or have a military coup or organize politically or do anything to undo some bad political position that we found ourselves in. Yeah.
And so, I guess this leaves the question of like, how stark do you think this trade-off is going to be? Like, because someone might hope like, like maybe it's just not so bad. I like skyscrapers. I like cool technology. Maybe it'll be fine.
Yeah. So some of the thoughtful people I've talked to have said something like, surely we can maintain Earth as a sort of nature reserve for biological humans. And that's in absolute terms a giant price to pay because the whole thing could be this like sphere of computronium simulating trillions of much more happy and sympathetic lives than biological humans. But still, it would be dwarfed in a relative sense by the Dyson sphere or whatever like that we could construct to, again, house 10 to the 10 times as many happy humans.
Yeah.
And so I certainly think this is plausible. Like I think it's plausible that better future governance could maintain such a carve-out in the long run. But I guess I'll say that there would, I think, have to be like a pretty fast takeoff for there not to be a long period where there's a bunch of agents on Earth that want to use their resources like marginally more for some like sort of more like machine-oriented economy, like whatever it is that we think helps growth but doesn't necessarily help humans. Just in the same way that like if there's like the human city next to the forest for a long time, like the city has to get rich enough and organized enough to like build a green belt or something like that. If that doesn't happen, then there's just like sprawl and it takes over the forest.
There's tons more we can talk about in this domain. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thanks very much for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure.
This episode was edited by Kate Brunotz, and Amber Dornace helped with transcription. The opening and closing themes are by Jack Garrett. Financial support for this episode was provided by the Long-Term Future Fund, along with patrons such as Alexei Malafeyev. To read a transcript of the episode, or to learn how to support the podcast yourself, you can visit axrp.net. Finally, if you have any feedback about this podcast, you can email me at feedback@axrp.net.